I so move.
Order. Dr. Russell Norman.
Mr. Speaker, I so move. Mr. Speaker, this cuts to the heart of our democracy, this issue around Maurice Williamson. And this cuts to the issue of whether our democracy is for sale under this government. But I think that we should start in this case from the point of view of the victim of domestic violence. Because I think that under our system, everybody is deserving of the protection of the law, regardless of how rich a person is, regardless of what connections a person may have, regardless of the wealth of a person's abuser. Everybody deserves the protection of the law in this country. And in this case, we had a minister intervening to protect the abuser, not to protect the victim. And I think that is what is truly deeply appalling above everything else in this case, is that here was a victim of domestic violence. The perpetrator in this case has pleaded guilty to domestic violence. And here we had a Minister of the Crown intervening in a police investigation to put pressure on the police not to go ahead with the prosecution for a domestic violence incident. Now, put yourself in the shoes of all the domestic violence victims across New Zealand. It is a hard thing to complain in a domestic violence situation. It is always difficult. It is always traumatic. And how much harder is it when you have Maurice Williamson intervening on the side of your abuser in a domestic violence situation? How much harder is it for a victim of domestic violence trying to get justice in this country under this government when we have a Minister of the Crown intervening to try to prevent the police from going ahead with the prosecution of a domestic violence perpetrator? Because that is the actual situation we have just experienced in our country. We have gone through the experience of a National Party minister ringing up the police in a case of domestic violence and leaning on the police not to go ahead with the prosecution. So from the point of view of the victim, which I think should be at the heart of this whole debate, everybody deserves equal protection from the law, but the National Party doesn't seem to believe that anymore. They seem to think that some people, if you are a domestic violence abuser who has a lot of money, then you should get special treatment. That's what happened in this case. I think it's important to read from the police email about the National Party Minister Maurice Williamson's conversation with the police about this case of domestic violence, where Maurice Williamson's mate was a domestic violence abuser in this case. Mr. Williamson rang up a senior police matter and he said, somebody, this is according to the police email, somebody should review the matter to ensure we were on solid ground, that is, the police were on solid ground, as Mr. Liu is investing a lot of money in New Zealand. Think about that for a second. What Mr. Williamson, a very senior National Party member, a member of the National Party for decades, a member of this parliament for decades, was saying, think about what it means. He was saying that this person, Mr. Liu, had to get special treatment because he was wealthy, because he was planning to invest money in New Zealand. The National Party thinks that you should get special treatment in the criminal justice system. This very senior National Party Member of Parliament and Minister was intervening in a police investigation to put pressure on the police not to go ahead with the prosecution of a domestic violence abuser, because that abuser was investing money in New Zealand because he was wealthy. Think about what that means for our justice system. Think about what that means for all the victims of domestic violence in New Zealand. Think about what it's like to complain about domestic violence, how difficult it is to go to the police in a case like this. Then, when you're involved in a police case like this, you have a Minister of the Crown intervening on the side of your abuser to try to stop the police proceeding with the prosecution. That is how low the National Party has now got. It is that low. Mr Jerry Brownlee says rubbish. I'm sorry, Mr Brownlee, but we have the evidence from the police in front of us right here. The police email says that Mr Maurice Williamson, a senior National Party minister, rang them up and he said to them he wanted to make sure somebody reviewed this matter, a domestic violence case where this friend of Mr Williamson was intervening to say that he wanted it reviewed so that the matter to ensure we were on solid ground as Mr Liu is investing a lot of money in New Zealand. So what he's saying is that the law is not equal. We are not all equal before the law, because if some of us are wealthy, then we get special treatment according to the National Party. That is what a senior National Party minister, Maurice Williamson, has just done in our country in the 21st century this year. Think about that. So where did the rot begin that we end up at the point where a senior National Party minister thinks that someone should get special treatment in a domestic violence case because they are wealthy? How did we end up in this situation with this government in 2014? And I would argue the problem is this. The National Party has adopted the culture of the world of business where everything is for sale, and that's fine, that's how it's meant to be. The world of business is all about money, and have applied it to the world of government and the world of justice. And what they've said is in that the justice system, you can buy your way out. If you're accused of being a domestic violence abuser and you've got contacts with the National Party and you're planning to invest a lot of money in New Zealand, then you can buy your way out of it. Maybe another donation to the National Party would fix it for you. You can have a National Party minister ring up senior police on your behalf. If you're a domestic violence abuser, you can have a senior minister in the National Party ring up the police and lean on them not to proceed with the investigation. So what the National Party is saying is that the culture of the world of business, and there's nothing wrong with the culture of the world of business, we need to make money in the world of business, that's fine. But when they bring it over to the world of justice and say the richer you are, the more justice you'll get, then that's wrong. And what the National Party has done is wrong. What Maurice Williamson did was wrong. Think about it from the point of view of the victim of domestic violence. For once, the National Party should look at its heart and think about it from the point of view of the position of the person who has had violence done against them by their partner. I would also say that they are applying this idea that money rules all else to the world of politics. In the world of politics, it's supposed to be one person, one vote. We are all supposed to be treated equally by the government of the day. That is, regardless of how wealthy you are, regardless of how much money you may give to a political party, you are all supposed to be treated equally in the world of politics and democracy. That's the idea of democracy. The whole idea, what our forefathers and mothers fought for over centuries, was that we could all have one person, one vote, and be treated equally by the law and equally by the government. We wouldn't get special treatment just because we were rich, or we wouldn't get special treatment just because we donated to a political party. And this is where the National Party has lost its way. And Maurice Williamson, I think, has come to represent everything that is wrong in this current government. And the attitude of Maurice Williamson, the amazing thing is listening to him even after he was sacked as a minister, he was defending the position that you should get special treatment if you are planning to invest lots of money in New Zealand. Now, this reminds me very much of the Sky City debate. Where did the rot set in? Let me suggest to you one place where this may have begun, and that was the Sky City debate. The idea of the Sky City debate was that this Parliament changed the law of New Zealand, the gambling laws of New Zealand, in order to facilitate Sky City. Now, you could argue they bought the law, that might be a bit strong, but you could certainly argue that the National Party position was that if they were willing to invest a lot of money, they should get the law changed for them. And that is very similar to the position of Maurice Williamson, which is if you're investing a lot of money in New Zealand, you should get special treatment from the justice system, even if you're a domestic violence abuser. So instead of saying, Mr Brownlee says this is wrong, so he's defending Maurice Williamson. Let's be clear about what Maurice Williamson did. He did not say everybody who is a domestic violence abuser or a victim, everyone should get treated equally by the law. Maurice Williamson said no. If you are planning to invest heavily in New Zealand, you will get special treatment. He said, your case must be on solid ground. So presumably everyone else's case doesn't need to be on solid ground, but if you're planning to invest lots of money in New Zealand, you should be on solid ground. Now, the Green Party doesn't believe what Maurice Williamson and the National Party believes. We believe that all people are equal before the law. We believe that all people are equal under our democracy, and we will defend that position. Every time the Green Party has proposed more transparency around donations to political parties, the National Party has rejected them. Every time. Every time they've rejected every attempt to clean up the system. Now, Simon Power, to give him his due, did have some respect for the idea that we need more transparency around it, and some of the changes he made around electoral finance were very, very good. But what we're seeing now is that this government opposes every attempt to clean up the political system, and the reason they oppose every attempt to clean up the political system is that they are defending the indefensible. And Maurice Williamson has become, I think, the most rotten piece of this whole ideology that the National Party has adopted, which is that the more money you have, the more say you should have in Parliament and in government and in our democracy. And if you have enough money, you should get special treatment under the criminal justice system. That's exactly what Maurice Williamson was saying in his intervention in this case. So, Mr Speaker, this is a pretty simple case. I don't think it's a complicated issue, actually. I think it's quite straightforward, and I think that it's good that Maurice Williamson has been sacked, and good on the Prime Minister for doing it. But the Prime Minister needs to look in the mirror and see, where did the rot set in? Where has this culture arisen that says the more money you have, the more influence you have in politics, and the more say you have in the criminal justice system? That's wrong, and I think most New Zealanders will reject what the government has been doing in this respect. We need to clean up politics in New Zealand, and we need to remember that the law is here to protect all New Zealanders, even if they happen to be the partner of a domestic violence abuser who gave a lot of money to the National Party. Even those people, Mr Brownlee, deserve our defence as a parliament, because the law is here to protect all of us.
The question is the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Minister Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the